Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles.
My name is Marcus Chen. I'm 41, a senior software architect at a fintech company in Seattle. I debug complex systems for a living, find the root cause of failures, patch vulnerabilities. On a Tuesday evening in October, I discovered I'd been living inside someone else's exploit for 3 years. I was supposed to be in Portland until Thursday, presenting our new payment processing architecture to a client. Their CTO canceled last minute. Family emergency. I caught an earlier flight home, thinking Jessica would be pleased. We've been discussing engagement lately, small conversations about rings and timelines that felt warm and real. The Uber dropped me at our Capitol Hill apartment just after 7. I could hear voices from the living room before I reached the door. Jessica's monthly wine night with her core group. I fumbled with keys, planning to slip in quietly, maybe grab a beer and let them finish their conversation in peace. Then I heard my name and the sentence that reset everything. Marcus is honestly the easiest boyfriend I've ever had. I've got one trick that always works. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. The kind of stop that makes your breathing manual. "Oh, tell us," Samantha said. Samantha, the divorce attorney who speaks about marriage like a legal strategy. I just go completely cold until he apologizes for whatever. Doesn't matter if I'm wrong. He hates conflict so much he'll bend over backward to fix things. It's like having an emotional thermostat I can control. Laughter. Light. Practiced. The kind that says this conversation has happened before. God, I wish my ex had been that trainable. Samantha again. You've got him figured out. The secret is finding what they're most afraid of losing and threatening it without actually saying you're threatening it. Marcus is terrified I'll leave, so I just disappear emotionally. Works every single time. More laughter. Claire, the lifestyle influencer with 200K followers, chimed in. That's actually genius. Way better than arguing. Arguments give them a chance to be right. I set my bag down carefully, no sound. My brain had shifted into what I call debugging mode. The same mental state I enter when a critical system is failing and I need to trace the problem back to its source. Emotion gets suspended. Analysis takes over. I walked to the kitchen like a man who belonged there, opened the fridge for a beer I didn't want, and listened to my girlfriend explain how she'd been hacking my emotional operating system for 3 years. The camping trip last summer, Jessica continued. He wanted to do some rustic thing in the mountains. I didn't argue. I just went distant for 3 days. By Thursday, he was researching luxury resorts in wine country. I remembered that week. The gradual chill, the way she'd answer questions with one word, the growing panic in my chest that I'd done something wrong, but couldn't identify what. I'd canceled the camping reservations and booked us 4 days in Napa instead. She'd rewarded me with warmth, affection, the restoration of her attention like sunlight after a storm. What about the Austin job? Beth asked. Beth, who sells million-dollar homes and calls it relationship counseling. Same thing. I never said don't take it. I just became unavailable until he figured out I didn't want to move. He withdrew the application without me having to be the bad guy. The Austin job. A startup wanted me as their lead architect, significant equity, the chance to build something from scratch. Jessica had been supportive in words, distant in energy. I'd interpreted her coolness as fear of change, stress about moving. I'd spent 2 weeks trying to restore the connection, eventually deciding the relationship was more important than career advancement. I closed the fridge and leaned against the counter, still hidden from the living room doorway. The beer was cold in my hands. I wasn't angry. That's what surprised me. I was experiencing the clarity that comes when a complex system suddenly makes sense. Every pattern snapped into focus. The restaurant disagreements where she'd go quiet until I suggested her preference. The social commitments I'd learn about through her mood rather than her words. The way our physical intimacy became contingent on my compliance with decisions I didn't remember making. The key, Jessica was saying, is never making it obvious. You can't threaten directly. You just withdraw what they need most until they self-correct. I thought about my parents, who immigrated from Taiwan when I was 5. They'd raised me to avoid conflict, to keep harmony, to solve problems through patience and hard work. What I thought was love was actually a vulnerability someone had learned to exploit. I set the beer on the counter and walked upstairs like a man who'd forgotten something in his office. Normal footsteps, no drama. Our bedroom was dim, street light painting geometric shadows on the wall. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop out of habit, then closed it again. I needed to think like an architect. When you discover a security flaw in production code, you don't patch the symptoms. You identify the vulnerability and remove it from the system entirely. Jessica's trick worked because I'd been providing the expected response to her withdrawal. Remove that response, and the exploit becomes worthless. I changed into a t-shirt and sat at the small desk by the window. The house was quiet except for muffled conversation downstairs and the occasional car on Pine Street. I thought about the Austin job, the camping trip, dozens of smaller moments where I'd felt something shift between us and scrambled to fix it without understanding what had broken. I wasn't angry at Jessica. She was using tools that worked, tools someone had probably taught her. But I was done being a system she could manipulate through manufactured emotional scarcity. My phone buzzed with a text from my project manager asking about Thursday's client presentation. I typed back that it had been canceled and I was available for the sprint planning meeting instead. Small words, but they felt different. I realized how often I'd been keeping my schedule fluid in case Jessica decided we were good again and wanted to make plans. When did I start living on standby? The voices downstairs crested with laughter, then moved toward the front door. Friends leaving, normal goodbyes. I heard Jessica's footsteps on the stairs a few minutes later. She appeared in the bedroom doorway with her hair down and wine on her breath. "Hey," she said, smiling. "Thought you weren't coming back until Thursday." "Client canceled," I said. "How was wine night?" "Good. The usual." She moved to the bathroom to wash her face. No mention of the conversation I'd overheard. No curiosity about my early return. Sam's thinking about dating again. Claire's got some new brand partnership drama. I watched her perform the routine of removing makeup, applying night cream, the small rituals that had once felt intimate. Now they looked like program execution. Predictable, efficient, designed to maintain system stability. She climbed into bed without reaching for me. That used to sting. That night, it was just data. I lay awake until almost 3, not because I was upset, but because my mind was busy rebuilding the architecture of how I'd live inside my own life. I made a list in my phone. Gym membership reactivation. Weekend hike with David from work. Dinner with my parents. Book the eye exam I'd been postponing. Oil change. New running shoes. Nothing dramatic. Just small things that belonged to me, reclaimed without announcement. The first test came Saturday morning. Jessica emerged from the bedroom in yoga clothes, hair in the high ponytail that meant she was planning something social. "Brunch with the girls at 11, she said, pouring coffee into her favorite mug, the one with the chip I'd offered to replace dozens of times. "Then Samantha wants to look at that new gallery in Belltown. You should come." The old Marcus would have checked his internal weather system, calculated whether declining would create the chill, and probably agreed to avoid any disturbance in our ecosystem. I could see myself doing it, apologizing to Mr. Patterson, rescheduling, spending the day nodding at art I didn't understand while Samantha made cutting observations about the artist's technique. "I'm helping Mr. Patterson install his smart home system today," I said. Told him I'd be there by 10. Mr. Patterson was our elderly neighbor whose wife had Parkinson's. I'd offered weeks ago to help them set up voice controls and automated lighting. Margaret could barely manage the light switches anymore, and Harold wasn't comfortable with the technology. Jessica knew about it. She'd been there when I'd made the offer. She paused with her mug halfway to her lips. A micro-expression of surprise, quickly smoothed into neutrality. The pause stretched just long enough to feel deliberate. "Oh, okay." She sipped her coffee, watching me over the rim with the expression she used when debugging a marketing campaign that wasn't performing as expected. "I thought we could spend the day together. We haven't really connected this week." Connected. Her word for when I was sufficiently compliant with her unspoken expectations. "We didn't make plans," I said gently. "I confirmed with him Tuesday. Remember? You were on the phone with Claire about her brand partnership drama." "Right." Another pause, longer this time. She set down her mug and leaned against the counter, arms crossed in the casual way that looked unstudied but never was. "Well, maybe tonight then, after you're done playing tech support." Playing tech support. The subtle dismissive edge that would have once sent me into repair mode would have made me question whether helping our elderly neighbors was really the best use of my time when my girlfriend wanted attention. Now it was just information about her state of mind, data points in the pattern I was finally seeing clearly. "Margaret can't turn off her bedroom light without help," I said. organizing screwdrivers in my toolbox. Harold's afraid he'll break something if he tries to program the system himself. It's not playing anything. She watched me check the battery on my drill, her expression cycling through micro-emotions I'd learned to read like error codes. Irritation, calculation, the slight softening around her eyes that usually preceded a tactical retreat. Of course, that's sweet of you. The warmth felt manufactured, like customer service training. Just text me when you're done, okay? Maybe we can do dinner somewhere nice. Maybe. The word that meant she'd decide based on whether I'd sufficiently atoned for choosing my commitment over her preference. I kissed her cheek and gathered my tools. Have fun at brunch. Tell the girls I said hi. The Patterson installation took 3 hours. We set up motion sensors in the hallway so Margaret wouldn't have to fumble for switches in the dark. We programmed voice commands for every room. Alexa, turn off bedroom lights, in Margaret's careful, shaking voice. Alexa, good morning, to brighten the kitchen and start the coffee maker. Harold kept taking notes on index cards, writing down each command in his precise engineer's handwriting. 43 years at Boeing. He told me while we mounted the smart thermostat. Helped design the 777's navigation system. But this stuff? He gestured at the tablet controlling the lights. Might as well be magic. We tested emergency protocols. If Margaret fell, she could say, Alexa, call Harold, and the system would route to his phone wherever he was in the house. Mrs. Patterson's eyes lit up when she could turn off the bedroom lights just by speaking. She clapped her hands like a child seeing snow for the first time. Marcus, this is wonderful, she said, practicing the commands. Alexa, living room lights to 30%. Oh, look at that. Harold insisted on making me lunch, grilled cheese and tomato soup, the kind of simple meal that tastes perfect when someone makes it for you out of gratitude. We sat in their kitchen with its 1970s linoleum and apple-shaped cookie jar, talking about their grandson's college plans, the neighborhood changes, small things that mattered to people who'd lived in the same house for 40 years. You know, Harold said, cutting his sandwich in half with the precision he'd probably learned in the Air Force. Margaret and I, we had our rough patches early on. Different communication styles. I wanted to fix everything with logic. She needed me to just listen sometimes. How did you figure it out? Time, patience, and realizing that marriage isn't about winning arguments. It's about both people feeling heard. He looked toward the living room where Margaret was testing voice commands with the enthusiasm of someone discovering superpowers. Took us maybe 10 years to really get the hang of it. 10 years. Good things take time to build right. You rush the foundation, the whole structure's unstable. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. Jessica seems like a nice girl. Smart. But sometimes smart people think they can shortcut the learning process. I wondered what Harold had observed during the few times they'd met Jessica. He was the kind of engineer who noticed systems, patterns, inefficiencies. Any advice? Don't fix what ain't broken in yourself just to keep someone else comfortable. And don't mistake keeping peace for keeping love. They're different things entirely. I came home just after 2 to find Jessica in the living room, phone in hand, posture stiff. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since morning. How was brunch? I asked. Fine. One word, delivered flat. Gallery interesting? Didn't go. She didn't look up from her phone. I recognized the pattern initiation, the emotional thermostat being adjusted downward. Previously, this would trigger my crisis protocols. I'd probe for what I'd done wrong, offer solutions, work to restore connection until she rewarded me with warmth. Instead, I poured a glass of water and started prepping vegetables for dinner. Want to help with stir-fry? I asked. Not hungry. Okay, I'll make enough if you change your mind. I cooked, ate at the counter while reading news on my phone, cleaned up. Jessica maintained her distance, responses monosyllabic when I spoke, body language broadcasting displeasure. The old me would have been crawling the walls by hour 2. The new me recognized it as weather that would pass. Sunday morning brought escalation. Jessica stayed in bed late, emerged without her usual good morning kiss, made coffee for 1. She moved through the apartment like I was furniture. Not hostile, just absent, withholding the energy that usually animated our shared space. I went for a run along the waterfront, came back to find her on the couch with her laptop, planning something social without including me. I showered, made eggs, offered to make her some. She declined without looking up. Claire's having people over tonight, she said finally. Dinner party. She mentioned it yesterday. Sounds fun. You should come. I've got code reviews to finish tonight. But you should go. The silence stretched long enough to feel deliberate. In the old system, this was where I'd feel the pressure to change my plans, to prioritize her social calendar over my work commitments. Fine, she said, closing the laptop with slightly more force than necessary. I spent the evening reviewing junior developers' code, documenting improvements, clearing my backlog. Jessica left at 6, dressed carefully, makeup precise. She kissed my cheek, but it felt performative, like she was demonstrating something. She came home after 11, made just enough noise to ensure I knew she'd returned, then went to bed without stopping by my office. I finished my work and found her already asleep, or performing sleep. Week 2 brought refinements to her strategy. The emotional distance became more sophisticated. She'd respond to questions, but offer no additional information. She'd be polite, but not warm. Present, but not engaged. It was like living with a roommate who tolerated your existence, but felt no obligation to enhance it. Tuesday morning exemplified the new normal. I was making coffee when she emerged from the bedroom, already dressed for work in the navy blazer that meant important meetings. Sleep okay? I asked. Fine. That client presentation today? The sustainable packaging campaign. Yes. Each response technically answered my question while offering nothing extra, no opening for connection. The old Marcus would have been running diagnostics by now. What had he done wrong? How could he restore normal communication protocols? Instead, I poured coffee into a travel mug and gathered my laptop bag. Good luck with the presentation. I'll be at the office if you need anything. She glanced up from her phone with an expression I couldn't quite parse. Surprised that I wasn't pursuing the conversation? Frustration that her withdrawal wasn't generating the expected response. Okay, she said finally. Have a good day. I kissed her forehead, the same gesture I'd made every morning for 3 years, and left for work. Previously, this would have sent me into diagnosis mode. What had I done? How could I fix it? What gesture would restore the balance? I'd have spent the commute analyzing our last few interactions, crafting text messages that might thaw the freeze, planning elaborate gestures for the evening. Now I continued my normal routines. Work, gym sessions I'd reactivated, dinner with my parents on Wednesday. My mother made dumplings and asked careful questions about Jessica. She's been busy with work, I said, which was true but incomplete. Busy is good, my father said in Mandarin, then switched to English. But not too busy for family. My parents had met Jessica a dozen times over 3 years. They were polite, welcoming, but I'd noticed they never asked when we were getting married, never made the gentle hints about grandchildren they'd started with my sister's boyfriend after 6 months. How are things between you two? My mother asked, refilling my teacup with the deliberate care that meant she'd been thinking about this question. We're figuring some things out. Figuring out what? How to be honest with each other. My parents exchanged one of their married couple glances, the kind that contained entire conversations. Honest is important, my father said, but also respect. Both directions. When I got home that night, Jessica was on the couch with her laptop, planning something social without including me. She looked up when I entered, smiled briefly, then returned to her screen. How was dinner with your parents? Good. Mom made those pork dumplings you like. Nice. She didn't ask if I'd brought any home, didn't make plans to see them soon, didn't engage with the opening I'd offered. I made tea and sat in the armchair with a book about distributed systems architecture. We spent the evening in parallel silence, both present but not together. Previously, this would have felt like failure. Now it felt honest. The breakthrough moment came on a Thursday evening. I was reading on the couch when she sat down beside me, close enough that her thigh touched mine. Physical proximity, deployed strategically. She was wearing the soft gray sweater that made her eyes look larger, hair down in loose waves that suggested careful but unstudied preparation. We should talk, she said, voice softer than it had been in days, pitched to the frequency that used to dissolve my resistance instantly. About what? Us. You've been distant lately. She tucked one leg under her body, angling toward me with the practiced grace of someone who knew exactly how the gesture would look. I feel like we're not connecting. I marked my page and set the book aside, giving her the attention she was requesting. I've been consistent. Same routines, same availability. What feels distant to you? You don't seem to care whether I'm upset. The accusation hung between us like a piece of code that wouldn't compile. I could feel her watching my face, looking for the micro-expressions that would tell her whether her approach was working. I care that you're upset. I don't accept responsibility for managing your emotions through compliance. She blinked like I'd spoken a foreign language, her carefully constructed vulnerability flickering for just a moment. The old Marcus would have immediately backtracked, softened the statement, offered reassurance that would restore the familiar dynamic. What does that mean? It means when you're unhappy about something, I want to understand what's wrong and help if I can. But I won't chase you through emotional withdrawal until I guess what you want and give it to you. That's not what I do. Her voice carried the edge of someone who'd been accused of something she couldn't quite deny. You withdraw when you don't get your way. You expect me to chase until I capitulate. It's worked for 3 years. I don't manipulate you, Marcus. She leaned forward, eyes wide with what looked like genuine hurt. I can't believe you'd even think that. You told Samantha you have a trick that always works. You described using emotional withdrawal to train me like a pet. Her face went through several expressions: surprise, calculation, hurt, defensiveness, before settling on the confused innocence that usually made me question my own perceptions. You were listening to my conversation? I came home early Tuesday. Heard you explain how easy I am to control. That's not. I was just venting to my friends. Girlfriends talk about their relationships. It doesn't mean anything. You weren't venting. You were strategizing. There's a difference. She stood up, paced to the window, arms crossed. You're being ridiculous. All couples have dynamics. This dynamic is finished. What does that mean? I won't be trained by emotional scarcity anymore. If you're upset, tell me. If you want something, ask for it. But I'm done chasing warmth that gets rationed based on my compliance. She stared at me like I'd announced I was moving to Mars. The system she'd been running had just crashed, and she didn't have a manual for recovery. So what? You're just going to ignore me when I'm hurt. I'll listen when you communicate. I won't negotiate with silence. She went to bed early that night. I finished my book and joined her an hour later. She was facing away, breathing the careful rhythm of someone pretending to sleep. I read a few more pages by bedside lamp, then turned off the light and slept fine. Friday brought what I recognized as Escalation Phase 2. Jessica recruited her support network. Samantha texted me directly. Hey, everything okay with you too? Jess seemed stressed. I replied, we're working through some communication patterns. Thanks for caring. Claire posted on Instagram about couples who grow apart when they stop trying, with a photo of Jessica looking pensive at some cafe. Beth mentioned running into Jessica at the grocery store and how she seemed overwhelmed by relationship stuff. The social pressure campaign was designed to make me feel like the problem, to generate enough guilt that I'd return to the old system. Instead, I continued my week. Work presentations, gym sessions, lunch with David, who'd been asking about hiking trails. I booked us a weekend trip to the Cascades. Saturday morning, Jessica tried a different approach. She came to the kitchen in her favorite robe, the one that used to derail any plans I had that didn't include her. She made elaborate breakfast, coffee in the good mugs, fresh fruit arranged carefully. I thought we could spend the day together, she said, voice warm for the first time in a week. Maybe drive up to Snoqualmie Falls. David and I are hiking the Rattlesnake Ridge Trail, leaving in an hour. Her smile flickered. Cancel. We need this. I committed to David. We can plan something for next weekend. You're choosing him over me. I'm keeping a commitment I made. There's a difference. The warmth evaporated. The robe suddenly looked like a costume she'd put on for a performance that had failed to generate its expected response. Fine, she said, voice tight. Go hiking. I kissed her forehead and left for the mountains. David and I spent 6 hours on trails, talking about work challenges, his daughter's college applications, the satisfaction of solving complex problems. We drove back as the sun set behind the Olympics, both tired and clear-headed. I came home to find Jessica in full Ice Queen mode. She'd made dinner for one, left no evidence that she'd considered my existence. When I asked about her day, she shrugged. When I mentioned the hike, she offered no response. The old me would have spent the evening trying to thaw the freeze. The new me heated leftovers, caught up on technical blogs, and went to bed without performing the anxiety dance. Week 3 brought the guilt offensive. Jessica shifted to vulnerable sadness, a different frequency of manipulation. She mentioned feeling disconnected, talked about couples who drift apart, suggested maybe we were incompatible after all. I feel like I don't know you anymore, she said one evening, sitting on the edge of the couch like she had news to deliver. You know me. You just don't control me. That's not fair. You've been using emotional withdrawal as a tool for 3 years. Now that it doesn't work, you're telling me I've changed. I have. I've stopped participating in a system that was fundamentally unequal. We should see a therapist. I'm open to that. We should examine why conflict resolution in our relationship looks like one person withdrawing until the other surrenders. She didn't pursue the therapy suggestion. My colleagues started noticing changes. In sprint planning meetings, I was more decisive about technical architecture. When product managers suggested unrealistic deadlines, I pushed back with data instead of accommodation. My code reviews became more thorough because I wasn't spending mental bandwidth managing Jessica's emotional temperature throughout the day. You seem different, David mentioned during our next hike through Discovery Park. We were taking a break at the Overlook, Seattle's skyline sharp against the gray October sky. More settled. Debugging some personal systems, I said, drinking water from the bottle I'd remembered to bring because I wasn't distracted by relationship maintenance. Found the root cause? Removed a vulnerability I'd been patching instead of fixing. He nodded, understanding the metaphor immediately. David had been through his own relationship debugging 5 years earlier, had emerged with the kind of clarity that comes from refusing to participate in systems that don't serve your growth. Those patches can get expensive, he said. Performance overhead, memory leaks. Eventually, the whole system starts running slower. Exactly. I was spending so much processing power on compatibility issues that I couldn't focus on actual functionality. We resumed hiking, boots crunching on the gravel trail. David was one of the few people who could walk in comfortable silence, who didn't need to fill every pause with commentary. After 20 minutes, he spoke again. Sarah used to do something similar. Not withdrawal exactly, but this way of making me feel like I was always one mistake away from losing her approval. Took me 2 years to realize I was living in constant performance review mode. How'd you figure it out? Therapy, mostly. And recognizing that love isn't supposed to feel like a job where you're never quite sure if you're meeting expectations. At work the following week, my team lead Marcus pulled me into a conference room after our architecture review. I wanted to check in with you, he said, closing the door behind him. Your contributions in meetings have been really sharp lately. More decisive. Are you happy with your role here? Very happy. Why? Just wanted to make sure. Sometimes when people start performing at a higher level, it means they're preparing to leave. He smiled. Selfishly, I hope you're staying. That payment processing redesign you proposed could revolutionize how we handle high-volume transactions. I realized I'd been bringing my full attention to work for the first time in months. Without the constant background process of anticipating and managing Jessica's moods, my cognitive capacity had expanded. I was solving problems I'd been too distracted to notice. I'm not going anywhere, I said. Just cleared up some memory leaks in my personal life. He laughed. Well, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. The team's noticed too. Alex mentioned that your code reviews have been incredibly helpful lately. Detailed, but not nitpicky. That afternoon, I stayed late to finish documentation for the new authentication system, something I'd been putting off for weeks. No rush to get home, no anxiety about whether Jessica would be in one of her moods. I could focus completely on the work that actually mattered to me. The pressure test arrived in week 4. Jessica's company offered her a promotion to marketing director for their Los Angeles division. 20% salary increase, stock options, the career advancement she'd been pursuing for 2 years. She presented it like breaking news, but her energy was watching my face instead of celebrating the opportunity. It's amazing, I said. You've worked toward this for years. I'd have to move to LA. I figured. That's it. You're not going to fight for us. I'll fight for a relationship built on mutual respect. I won't fight to convince someone to stay who's using leaving as leverage. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. You don't care if I go? I care about you. I want you to make the choice that serves your growth. But I won't beg you to choose me over your career, and I won't follow you to a city I don't want to live in just to maintain a relationship that's been fundamentally unequal. Unequal how? You've had veto power over my emotions for 3 years. You decide when we're close, when we're distant, when I'm allowed to feel secure. That's not partnership. That's ownership. She stared at me like I'd revealed I was actually an alien who'd been studying human behavior. I don't understand what happened to you. I stopped debugging our relationship by patching my behavior every time you went offline. I started examining the code. You're talking like a robot. I'm talking like someone who finally understands the system he's been living in. That night, she called Samantha. I could hear half the conversation from the kitchen. Jessica was crying, explaining that I'd changed, that I didn't care about the relationship anymore, that she didn't know how to reach me. What she meant was, the exploit no longer worked, and she didn't have alternative methods for getting her needs met. I felt compassion for her confusion, but I didn't feel responsible for solving it. The next week brought Jessica's final strategic pivot. She scheduled couples therapy without consulting me, then announced it like a fait accompli. Dr. Martinez can see us Thursday at 6. You made an appointment without asking me? I'm trying to save our relationship. You're trying to find a professional who'll diagnose me as the problem and recommend I return to the old system. That's not. I'll go. But I'm not going to perform being broken so you can feel better about being controlling. Dr. Martinez turned out to be a small woman with sharp eyes who specialized in relationship dynamics. She asked us to describe our conflict patterns. Jessica talked about feeling shut out, about my recent emotional distance, about how I'd stopped prioritizing the relationship. She performed vulnerability skillfully, mentioning how scared she was that we were growing apart. When Dr. Martinez asked for my perspective, I described the conversation I'd overheard, the pattern of emotional withdrawal and restoration, the way disagreements got resolved through one person capitulating rather than both people compromising. Give me an example, Dr. Martinez said. I talked about the Austin job, how Jessica had never explicitly opposed it, but had become progressively colder until I decided the relationship was more important than the opportunity. Jessica, how do you respond to that description? I was scared about moving. I needed time to process. Did you tell Marcus you were scared? Not directly. How did you communicate your feelings? Long pause. I guess I withdrew until he figured it out. Dr. Martinez looked at both of us. Marcus, how do you typically respond when Jessica withdraws? I used to chase. Try to restore connection through accommodation. I don't do that anymore. What changed? I realized that what I thought was love was actually me being trained to avoid abandonment through compliance. Jessica's face crumpled. That's not what I meant to do. But it's what you did, Dr. Martinez said gently. Intent and impact aren't the same thing. We scheduled 3 more sessions. Jessica struggled with direct communication because vulnerability felt dangerous to her. I learned that my conflict avoidance had enabled her manipulation patterns. We both had to rebuild our interaction systems from scratch. The process was messy. Jessica would start to slip into old patterns, catch herself, try to ask for what she wanted directly, then get frustrated when I didn't immediately comply. I had to learn the difference between compromise and capitulation, between being loving and being controlled. 2 months later, we were still together but operating on completely different software. Jessica decided to take the LA promotion. I negotiated remote work with quarterly trips south. The physical distance actually helped us learn to communicate without the old power dynamics. We argue about real things now. Money, career priorities, where to spend holidays. But the arguments resolve through discussion rather than one person surrendering to emotional warfare. Last weekend, we ran into Samantha at Pike Place Market. She looked at us, really looked, then smiled. You two seem different, she said. Good different. Jessica laughed, the kind of real laugh that means relief without explanation. We figured some things out. Walking home with coffee and pastries, Jessica stopped at a crosswalk and said, You know, you could have left, right? When you found out about the trick. I did leave, I said. I left the system. That's why I could stay with the person. What's the difference? I'm here by choice now, not programming. The light changed, and we crossed the street. 2 people who'd learned the difference between love and control, between showing up and giving in. I don't romanticize what we rebuilt. We didn't transform into a couple who posts golden hour photos with captions about doing the work. We became 2 people who can disagree without one person disappearing emotionally until the other surrenders. Jessica still catches herself sometimes, still feels the impulse to withdraw when she doesn't get her way. But now she recognizes it as a reflex from old code, not a relationship strategy. I still sometimes feel the urge to chase when she's upset, but I've learned to distinguish between supporting her through difficulty and being managed by her moods. There's an alternate timeline where she never learned to communicate directly, where the trick was more important than the connection. In that timeline, I pack carefully, forward my mail, change passwords. Not out of spite, but alignment. I know that version because I kept it real the whole time. Kept an apartment bookmarked. Kept a list of furniture I'd take. Kept my head clear enough to leave if respect didn't show up. The option made me honest. It made her honest too. Some people say love is about fighting for each other. I learned it's about choosing each other without coercion. Every day, we both make the decision to stay not because leaving would be catastrophic, but because being together serves the people we're becoming. The trick she thought controlled me is obsolete code now. What replaced it is something simpler. Two people who show up without price tags attached. If that ever changes, if the old manipulation tries to reinstall itself with updated packaging, I won't debug it through accommodation. I'll wish her well, transfer what's hers, and walk out with my name intact. Because staying is a choice, not a sentence. And respect is not negotiable.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.